Breaking right now on WUSA 9 News at 5, we are just moments away from a planned demolition at the Baltimore Bridge-collapse site. So a large section of wreckage you see right there is expected to explode piece by piece to free the Dali ship and ultimately get that channel cleared out. Thank you for being here with us tonight at 5. I'm Lorenzo Hall.
I'm Leslie Foster. It's been such a long time that it's been sort of just stuck there. Let's get right to our Scott Broom live in Baltimore, where this demolition could literally happen any moment now. Scott?
Well, Leslie, you'll notice I'm not standing in front of the camera so that there will be no obstruction to the view of this when it finally goes off. We just received, we believe, a 2 minutes heads up. A lot of the Defense Department contractors here have just launched their drones to take pictures, so it does appear this is on time. It was scheduled for a 5 o'clock demolition of that huge steel superstructure you see hanging off the Dali, the sort of iconic view of this disaster that's been there since it happened on March 26th. Now, what we're expecting here is a warning horn, a long marine horn blast, and that should give us about a 1 minute heads up before it goes, and then 3 short blasts of a horn, which will indicate a 10 count to that implosion. Now, they're using the term precision cutting when they've been talking about this. They really have downplayed the idea that explosives are being used. We've been told repeatedly again and again not to expect some sort of Hollywood spectacular. Instead, to expect more than a dozen charges that have been placed in critical structural points on that steel superstructure that are going to go off and break it in just such a fashion so that it folds up and falls into the Patapsco River here away from the ship. That's the plan. The charges have been set at many of the critical junctures. We can see black marks on the bridge where they have, oh, we got 5 count. Okay, there it goes. The remains of the Francis Scott Key Bridge that had been resting on the bow of the Dali, just demolished using precision charges. We were expecting the blast of marine horns to give her a heads up. That's not the way it went. I heard somebody say 5, 4, 3 and stop talking, and there it goes. You can see the big puff of smoke. It does appear to have gone off as the engineers expected. They wanted the blast to go off to break the bridge, to get the weight off the Dali, and for the remains of much of the bridge to fall away from the ship and into the water. And that's exactly what we saw. Still resting on the Dali right now is a lot of the concrete roadway, the remains of the Francis Scott Key Bridge still there, but they do believe that they've removed enough of the weight, or will be able to remove an additional amount of weight to be able to float that ship and back it out within 2 days was the plan, as we were briefed earlier today, to get the ship out of that position. And that, of course, clears the way for these huge dredging cranes that have been on site since the disaster to come in and remove a lot of the remains we just saw fall into the Baltimore Harbor Channel and get the whole channel open. The plan is to still have this channel open by the end of this month. Now, we can see that the Dali doesn't look like it moved much as that weight was removed. So unclear whether or not the ship had enough weight removed to begin floating a little higher in the water. I don't see that, but that's the plan. Pretty dramatic moment here as we see the remains of the Francis Scott Key Bridge after this huge calamity and disaster here in Baltimore. It's been since March 22nd when that ship hit the bridge, brought it down, the loss of life, 6 workers, the last of whom's remains were found at the end of last week, clearing the way for this demolition project to go. Another interesting note before we toss it back to you. One of the reasons they chose demolition charges was because that steel, as it rested on a Dali, was under stress. And if you can imagine, say, sawing through a piece of wood that's got weight on each end, you saw it in the wrong place and it snaps. and then the wood potentially injures the person sawing it. Well, imagine that on a giant scale. With steel, as they were cutting it, they were concerned that it had enough stress in it that it could literally snap and injure or kill any of the workers that were up there. The highest charge on the bridge was set at 182 feet above the water line. So there it is. You can see the aftermath of this now. The remains of the Francis Scott Key Bridge blasted and falling into the harbor, clearing the way, hopefully, for the removal of the additional debris that's still resting on the Dali. And the plan is to move the Dali out of that position and towards a dock within 2 days, setting the stage for opening up the rest of Baltimore's harbor. Reporting live from the remains of the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, Scott Broom, WUSA 9, back to you.
What a sight there. And I got to say, Scott, you mentioned that crews told us not to expect any sort of Hollywood-style explosion here, but I got to say, this looks pretty Hollywood to me, huh? The way it just crumbled there, it's off of that ship finally. You can see the front of the Dali as well. We haven't seen that vantage point. It's pretty badly damaged from when it hit the bridge back in late March.
And just remarkable to see up close that part of the roadway on top of the Dali. Scott, we have been wondering for the better part of 7 weeks now, what is happening with the crew of the Dali? Are they still on board the Dali? What do we know about the status of the crew?
They are. Yes, they are. They are still on board the Dali. They were removed to the aft section of the ship. Forgive me for getting into mariner language, but you see all the containers that are stacked on the ship. You can see the bridge where all the operations of the ship occur under normal circumstances, about in the middle, way in the back, in the stern, the aft. All the crew was removed to that location. They're still on the ship, and the reason they're still there today, importantly, is because they are best poised to react to any sort of problem if anything had gone wrong. They are, after all, the crew of the ship. They have been interviewed by the NTSB and other investigators. You have to remember, when international mariners sign up to go on a job, they very rarely leave a ship in the many, many ports around the world where they call. It's all business until their contracts are up. Now, obviously, this is a unique situation, but it is not unusual for the crew of a ship to stay on board for months at a time. And that's what's occurring with the crew on the Dali. If we are able to, and unfortunately I'm not able to see what you're seeing on television at the moment, but if we can get a second look at that implosion or demolition, whatever you want to call it, you're right. They warned us up repeatedly that this was, quote, not going to be a Hollywood production. Part of that is sensitivity for the 6 lives that were lost here. They really didn't want to make this seem like some sort of spectacular sort of event that takes away from the immense tragedy that occurred here. And in fact, it's notable that this use of explosives and demolition did not occur until the final body of a bridge victim was recovered late last week, clearing the way for what happened here. Yes, in fact, we saw explosions in multiple points on the bridge, a huge puff of smoke, and quite a concussion here from, I would say, about 3/4 of a mile distance as the demolition charges went off. So there you have it. The Dali now a very significant measure more towards being freed and towed back to the dock. And more remains of the Francis Scott Key Bridge now detached from the Dali thanks to these demolition charges and resting on the bottom of the harbor, where they will be much easier to further demolish, pick up, and clear that channel by the end of the month.
Yeah, just interesting sort of juxtaposition of both humanity and commodity, right? Knowing that they have to move this to be able to fully open the channel for business and commerce to continue, but fully taking into consideration the sensitivity of the people who serve. Those 6 men were serving for the rest of us, and they gave their lives in service because of what happened here.
And we heard Governor Moore say, before they got to this point, that would be their priority, recovering the bodies of those 6 workers to try and give their families some sort of closure. And as Scott mentioned, the last person's body was recovered a short time ago, and that's why we're witnessing this moment today, this critical moment in clearing that channel as well. We're going to talk about next steps when we see you back here at 6 o'clock, Scott. Thank you.